At 2:17 a.m., the first section of the bridge slipped into the river and vanished under the current. The sound it made wasn't loud, but everyone heard it. Steel grinding, a hollow splash, then the gurgling gulp of the Vyres swallowing another piece of their only way forward. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The men stood ankle-deep in black water, faces ghosted by the faint light of lanterns covered with mud-stained cloth. One of them whispered, "If we lose another panel, the whole army stays stuck." It was August 6, 1944. The war had shifted inland from Normandy, but in the shattered countryside near St. Lo, it still smelled like the coast, wet grass, oil, and the faint rot of things burned too long. The German retreat had been brutal and exacting. Every bridge along the Vyre River blown to shards. Every road cratered deep enough to hide a jeep. Behind the river waited the 2nd Armored Division, hundreds of tanks, supply trucks, and the soldiers who would carry the Allied advance toward Paris. But without a bridge, they were going nowhere. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had arrived just before dusk, a convoy of trucks loaded with prefabricated steel, boats, and Bailey bridge panels. Portable metal spans the British had designed for moments exactly like this. Major David Pergrin, only 27 but already built like a man older than the war, stepped into the mud with a clipboard and a stopwatch. "We start at 2100, he said. "We finish before dawn. No excuses." The math was simple and impossible. The Vyre was 300 meters wide. The current was fast, black, and full of wreckage. The men had less than 14 hours to assemble a structure that could hold a 50-ton tank, while under enemy observation and with no margin for error. Private John Peterson, the youngest in his squad, wrote later in his notebook, "The river looked endless. You couldn't see the far bank, just mist. The tanks behind us were rumbling, like beasts waiting for someone to feed them steel." By 9 p.m., the air vibrated with the thud of hammers and the rhythmic grunt of men pushing panels into alignment. The sound carried across the water. Somewhere in the dark, a German machine gun tested its barrel with a single burst, 3 quick flashes, then silence. They worked barefoot or in soaked boots, dragging pontoons into place, tightening bolts with frozen fingers. Every 15 minutes, someone checked the alignment with a flashlight covered in red cloth. The light trembled each time the current tugged the unfinished bridge downstream. At 11:40, the first full section held, 2 pontoons, a steel frame, and a deck wide enough for a jeep. The men allowed themselves a single breath of relief before moving on. Corporal Brooks dropped his wrench into the water and dove after it without thinking. "We don't lose tools," he grinned, shivering when he climbed back out. He was bleeding from one hand, but refused a bandage. "Waste of tape," he muttered. Overhead, the sky was starless, the air wet and metallic. From the far bank came the occasional thud of German artillery repositioning. The sound didn't seem directed at them yet. It was just searching. At midnight, a sudden roar tore through the dark. A section of the temporary scaffolding cracked, and 2 men tumbled into the river. Pergrin's shout was immediate. "No lights. Rope team." 4 men moved like silhouettes, hauling the fallen back by touch alone. The current almost took one of them. Almost. By 1 a.m., the wind shifted north, bringing the sour tang of cordite. Someone muttered a prayer in Pennsylvania English. Someone else laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh that hides exhaustion. They were 40 feet across when the first accident happened. The joint slipped. One panel buckled. Then, with a groan that sounded human, the section tore loose and drifted away, slowly at first, then faster, the water folding over it like a curtain closing on a stage. No one spoke. Pergrin stood motionless for 5 full seconds, then said, calm but cutting, "Reset. New section. Keep moving." They obeyed without question. Metal rang, hammers struck, chains pulled tight. In the dark, the river swallowed the noise and gave nothing back. Peterson scribbled a single line in his notebook before his pencil broke. "We build while the river tries to eat us." By 2:30, half the men couldn't feel their hands. The rest didn't notice. They moved by rhythm now, a strange mechanical grace. Lift, align, bolt, tighten. Somewhere behind them, the engines of waiting tanks kept idling, the low growl rolling over the hills. The sound was a reminder. If they failed, the entire advance, thousands of soldiers, months of momentum, would stall on this nameless French river. Then, at 2:17 a.m., that sound of metal slipping broke the rhythm. The bridge section dropped, splashing, gone in an instant. Men froze, watching the current carry away their last 3 hours of work. For a moment, it felt like the river had won. Then Pergrin's voice, quiet but sharp, cut through the silence. We start again. And this time, we finish before she takes another piece. They waded back in, black water curling around their knees, hands numb, eyes raw from fatigue. Behind them, the moon edged through the clouds, throwing just enough light to see their own breath. Ahead, the river waited, silent and merciless. By 3 a.m., they'd built 40 feet again. 40 feet of bridge that glistened like wet bone under the faint moonlight. And that's when the Germans finally noticed. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The first shell struck the far bank. A brief, brilliant flash that tore open the fog. Then came the second, landing closer, throwing a wave of cold river water over the men crouched in the mud. The air filled with a whistling hum. Then the staccato rhythm of machine guns slicing through the dark. Tracers stitched the night in orange lines. The men flattened themselves against the earth, hearts hammering. Someone cursed softly. Someone else laughed. A short, nervous laugh that ended too fast. It was 3:15 a.m. The Germans had found them. The Vire River shimmered faintly under the flashes. Each ripple caught the light like a pulse. Major David Pergrin didn't flinch. He moved down the line, his voice calm but iron hard. "Keep working," he said. "They can't hit what they can't see." No one believed that. But they believed him. The men of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion got back to work, crawling, sliding, hauling sections of cold steel through black water. Each Bailey Bridge panel weighed 600 pounds, thick with mud and blood. They worked barehanded now. Gloves were too slippery. The sound of clanging metal carried across the river, each echo answered by a burst of German fire. In the official battalion log, the entry would be short. Enemy fire commenced 0315 hours. No work stoppage reported. But paper didn't bleed. Paper didn't tremble when the air itself shook. Private John Peterson, barely 20, remembered the river as a moving shadow with a heartbeat. He wrote later in his pocket diary, "Every time I looked up, I expected to see the next shell with my name on it." Corporal Alan Brooks was hit first. A shard of shrapnel tore through his thigh, knocking him down. The medic crawled over, shouting that he had to get out. Brooks just shook his head, white-faced and grinning. "I can still carry pins," he said. "My legs work, that's enough." He went back to work. When the next explosion came, it ripped a pontoon from its moorings. The current seized it instantly, dragging it away like a toy. Someone shouted, "Let it go." But Pergrin's voice sliced through the chaos. "No, bring it back. We don't rebuild what we already built." 3 men dove in without hesitation. The current spun them sideways. One vanished beneath the surface for a full 5 seconds. When he surfaced, coughing, he had the rope clenched between his teeth. They pulled together, hands slipping, boots digging into the mud. The pontoon lurched back into place. Nobody spoke. Nobody cheered. They just kept going. By 4 a.m., the fog had thickened into a gray wall. The river hissed around the half-built structure, a creature breathing in its sleep. The men worked in rhythm now, their movements mechanical. Lift, align, bolt, tighten. Their shoulders burned. Their lips were cracked from the cold. The Germans switched to mortars. The blast came irregularly, sometimes 2 minutes apart, sometimes 5. Each explosion drew closer. The men could feel the shock waves in their ribs. Then came one so near it blew a plank off the bridge, sending splinters across the deck. A hammer clanged off into the water. Silence followed, deep, ringing silence. And then, as if nothing had happened, someone started hammering again. The others joined in. The rhythm returned. Pergrin watched from the bank, his eyes reflecting the faint glint of the bridge lights. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His men knew what was at stake. Behind them, the engines of hundreds of tanks idled, a steady metallic growl waiting for the path forward. Every second of delay meant soldiers dying somewhere else. By 5 a.m., the bridge stretched halfway across the river. The men looked like phantoms, their uniforms soaked, faces streaked with soot. A new light began to bleed through the fog. Dawn, pale and ghostly. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. Then the river erupted again, a direct hit on the far side. Mud, water, and metal rained down. One man screamed, clutching his arm, but kept working with the other hand. Pergrin shouted for them to move faster. Peterson caught sight of a reflection on the far bank, the brief flash of a German helmet, then nothing. He realized both sides were probably just trying to survive the night. The thought hit him hard. We're all just building bridges to stay alive. At 5:40, the fog lifted slightly. The outline of the opposite shore became visible, just enough to see where they had to connect. That sight gave them energy, something close to hope. The river was still rising, pushing against the pontoons like a living thing trying to pull them apart. One last shell landed close enough to knock Peterson off his feet. He came up gasping, choking on river water and mud. Brooks hauled him up, shouting, "We're almost there, kid. Don't let her win." At 6 a.m., they reached the middle, 150 feet of steel stretching from the near shore toward the fog-bound opposite bank. The bridge swayed under its own weight, but held. They paused for breath, their hands raw and bleeding, eyes burning from exhaustion. In the command jeep nearby, the radio hissed. 6 o'clock report over. Pergrin lifted the handset, his voice flat but steady. Bridge halfway complete. No casualties reported. He glanced toward the wounded men, then turned away. "Copy that," came the reply. "Division expects tank crossing by 800 hours. Pergrin exhaled slowly. "Then we build faster," he said. He looked down at his watch. 2 hours left. By 6:30, the fog turned gold with sunrise. On the near shore, the first tanks lined up, Shermans, their guns already aimed ahead. The sound of their engines rolled like thunder. The vibration shook the bridge even before it was finished. Peterson stared at the trembling structure, the water licking at its sides, the far bank still out of reach. "If they drive now," he muttered, "it'll all come down." But orders were orders. At 7:47 a.m., a tank lurched forward, tracks grinding against the mud. The bridge wasn't ready. The last panels still hung loose. The men shouted. The river roared. And the first tank rolled anyway. The sun rose red over the Vire, not the soft kind of red that warms the fields, but the raw color of rust and smoke. By 6:30 a.m., the fog had thinned, and what it revealed looked less like a river crossing and more like a wound. Half a bridge twisting across the water, sections swaying, men crawling over it like ants on a rail. Then came the sound everyone dreaded, the distant thrum of engines in the sky. At first, they thought it was Allied planes returning from patrol. But when the first shapes appeared through the haze, narrow, black silhouettes with iron crosses under their wings, no one spoke. The men froze mid-motion. The sun was coming up, Private John Peterson would later write. And so were the bombers. The first pass was low. The Germans didn't drop bombs, not yet. They fired, strafing the far bank where the engineers stored spare pontoons. The bullets hit the water in tight rows, stitching it shut. Sparks jumped from the steel frames. Then, almost lazily, one of the planes released a single bomb. It fell into the river, missed the bridge by 20 yards, and erupted in a geyser of black water that soaked everything in range. The shock nearly tore the unfinished sections apart. Men clung to the railings, coughing, wiping grit from their eyes. In the command post, Major Pergrin slammed a fist against the radio. "Tell division we're still building," he barked. Static answered. When the bombers circled for a second run, Pergrin shouted, "Get down." The men flattened against the decking, gripping the cold steel. The planes came screaming over the river, machine guns blazing. One burst hit close, shredding a supply crate. The smell of gasoline spread fast. Someone yelled, "Fire!" 2 engineers ran straight toward the flames with shovels of mud. When it was over, their faces were black with soot, but the bridge still held. They had 230 feet done, 70 more to go. The tanks were already idling at the water's edge, ready to roll. A captain from the armored division appeared, shouting over the noise, "We need crossing by 8. Pergrin turned slowly, his eyes rimmed red from exhaustion. "You'll have it when it's safe." The captain didn't blink. "We don't have that luxury, Major." Behind them, the sky tore open again. Another wave of bombers. Peterson dropped to his knees, pressing his helmet into the decking. The vibrations shook his bones. The river itself seemed to shudder. For a moment, he thought the whole world would collapse into the water. But then silence. The bombers were gone. Just wind, smoke, and the groaning of steel settling into place. The men stood, stunned, dripping. No one dared to speak. "Check the joints," Pergrin shouted. "If it moves, we fix it." They worked faster now, every motion automatic. Brooks, his leg wrapped in bandage, dragged another panel into position, sweat streaking through the grime on his face. "Rope," he yelled. "Rope now." Peterson tossed it. The section slid into place with a metallic sigh. The current tugged hard, but the bridge held. Barely. From the far side of the river came a muffled explosion. German artillery again, but farther away now. It sounded like frustration. By 7:15, the sky turned a brighter gray, the kind that hides more planes. The men hurried, pin after pin, bolt after bolt, their hands raw and bleeding. Then came the order over the radio, crackling through the static. "Tanks ready. Crossing begins at 07:45. Pergrin's jaw tightened. "It's not finished," he said quietly. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "It doesn't matter." The first Sherman tank lurched forward at 7:47. The bridge wasn't complete. The last panels hung open like ribs. The men waved frantically, shouting over the roar of the engine. The driver either didn't hear or didn't care. The tank hit the decking with a groan that shook the whole span. The pontoons dipped, then steadied. The river rose to the wheels. One more inch, and it would have flooded the engine. The driver didn't stop. He crawled forward, inch by inch, across the floating skeleton of steel. Every man on the bridge watched, not breathing. The water hissed under the treads. The sound of creaking metal drowned out everything else. Halfway across, the bridge flexed downward. The men flinched, waiting for the inevitable break. But somehow, impossibly, it held. By the time the tank reached the far bank, the men exhaled as one. Someone laughed. Someone else cried. Then Pergrin said quietly, "Now we finish it." And they did. Under fire, under exhaustion, with blood in the water and daylight on their backs. By 9 a.m., the Vire Bridge was complete. It had taken 14 hours and cost 4 lives. But through it, the entire 2nd Armored Division would roll forward, pushing the war east, leaving behind only a river that still smelled faintly of oil and courage. The first tank moved forward. The bridge bent, then screamed. Steel cried out like a living thing. Every man froze. One more inch, and it would have folded into the river. Dawn burned red through the fog. Smoke drifted low, mixing with the cold breath of the Vire. On both banks, soldiers watched in silence. The tank crept across, treads grinding against wet timber. The deck shuddered, moaned. Beneath it, the pontoons strained to stay alive. Sergeant William Carney ran beside the tank, boots splashing, eyes on every bolt. He knew each pin by heart. When a pontoon started to drift, he didn't think. He jumped. The rope slapped his shoulder. He caught it, pulled hard, nearly losing his balance. The line went taut, muscles tearing. The pontoon stopped an arm's length from breaking free. Then the mortars came. The first round hit upstream. The second landed closer. The third found them. The blast rolled across the bridge like thunder. Men flattened themselves to the deck, mud and metal splashing over their helmets. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but ringing silence. Carney stood first. "Check the joints," he shouted. "We hold or we drown." They crawled forward, hammering pins back into place. Sparks danced in the smoke. One beam slipped free. Carney dropped to his knees, drove it back with his wrench until the metal sang. Across the river, the tank kept moving. Another explosion. The bridge heaved. A corporal dove beneath the deck to brace a shifting beam, water rising to his chest. Someone screamed. No one stopped. The tank's tracks creaked over the weak center section. The bridge sagged, dipped, then steadied, barely. Pergrin stood on the bank, radio pressed to his ear, face unreadable. "Load test proceeding," came the report. He didn't answer. He watched the tank crawl forward like a miracle being built second by second. A bullet hissed past, grazing a helmet. Sparks from ricochets lit the fog. Carney ignored them, running the line again, checking every joint. The bridge groaned under the weight, but it lived. When the tank reached mid-span, the pontoons dipped into the current. The water rose almost to the hull. The sound was unbearable, iron flexing, wood cracking, a living heartbeat on the edge of death. Then the tank rolled onto the far bank. The bridge sprang back, trembling but whole. The men exhaled. Carney's legs nearly gave out. He laughed once, sharp and breathless. On the radio, a voice said, "Bridge load test successful under combat fire. First armored vehicles crossed 0758 hours." The words sounded unreal, like something from another world. "Next tank," Pergrin said quietly. The second Sherman moved across. The bridge held stronger this time, as if it trusted itself. Mortars kept falling, but farther away now, blind, frustrated. Engineers ran the length of the span, tightening ropes, driving pins, ignoring the splinters and blood. No one was shooting back. No one was hiding. Their war was to keep the bridge alive. By 8:05, more tanks followed, the sound of their engines rolling over the river like thunder. Exhaust hung thick in the morning air. The deck trembled with each passing weight, but it didn't give. Carney stood by the rope he'd tied earlier. It still held, a single knot between chaos and collapse. By 8:15, 30 tanks had crossed. The last man on the bridge turned, covered in soot, eyes wide from exhaustion. He looked back once more at the twisting lattice of steel and rope, the black water swirling beneath it, the sky still bruised from shellfire. The bridge still stood. They expected to die on that river. Instead, they watched the armor roll into the sunrise and realized they'd changed the course of the war. By mid-morning, the last of the tanks had crossed. The bridge still trembled, but it held, shivering under the weight of victory. On both banks, the engineers stood covered in mud, faces streaked with oil, hands raw and bleeding. No cheering, no salutes, just a quiet kind of disbelief. August 7th, 1944. The 2nd Armored Division broke through the Vire and moved west toward Avranches. In the span of one day, the Americans opened what would later be called Patton's Corridor, the road that freed northern France. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion packed up what remained of the pontoons. Many of them were twisted, dinted, scarred by fire. When an officer suggested they rebuild for safety, Major David Pergrin shook his head. "She's done her job," he said softly. "Let her rest." The air still smelled of burnt oil and wet wood. Downriver, the wreck of a German half-track drifted against the bank. A few men stood watching it turn slowly in the current. Sergeant Carney was among them, arms crossed, silent. His boots were still soaked from the night before. In his notebook, Private John Peterson wrote, "No one remembers the bridges. But if we hadn't built it, there'd be no road at all." When war reporters arrived the next day, the scene was almost serene. Green fields, quiet water, a faint mist over the river. The only trace of the battle was the twisted steel frame of the Bailey Bridge and the black smudge of smoke still hanging in the air. One correspondent, a young man from Stars and Stripes, asked an engineer what it felt like to build under fire. The soldier, a corporal with grease on his face, thought for a moment and said, "It's like fixing a roof while the house is burning and hoping you finish before it collapses." The line made it into a newspaper back home, but not their names. The heroes of the bridge stayed anonymous, just Army Engineers, France. That night, in a small field camp beyond St. Lo, Major Pergrin filed his official report. Bridge held. Casualties, minor. He paused, then opened his personal notebook and wrote a second line beneath it. "I don't know how it held. I still hear it creak when I close my eyes." He didn't mean it poetically. Every man in the 291st knew the sound, that high, aching note of steel on the edge of breaking. Some would hear it in their dreams for years. As dusk fell, the engineers sat around a small fire, eating from tin cups, saying little. A jeep passed by, officers from the Armored Division, and one of them waved. Carney nodded back, not sure what else to do. The tank crews were heroes now, pushing through France. The engineers would move on to another river, another night, another set of bolts. But something about that bridge stayed behind. The men spoke of it as if it were alive, a thing that had chosen not to die. Before lights out, Peterson walked down to the river one last time. The moon caught the wet metal and made it gleam faintly, like bone. He touched the rail. It was still warm from the day's wait. In the quiet, he could almost hear it breathing, the water sliding between pontoons, the faint knock of current against steel. Behind him, Carney's voice broke the silence. "You ever think about it?" "About what?" Peterson asked. Carney squinted across the water. That we build things for others to cross, and then we're the ones left behind. Peterson didn't answer. A flare went up somewhere to the east, white, silent, like a ghost of the night before. They both watched until it faded, and then turned back toward camp. The next morning, the engineers were gone, leaving only the bridge and a few footprints in the mud. Tanks rolled past again, one after another, their noise fading into the horizon. For most soldiers, the war moved on. For the engineers, it stayed on that river. In 1979, an old man from Pennsylvania wrote to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, "Does anyone remember the bridge we built near St. Lo?" He signed it with a shaky hand. John Peterson, 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, read. Weeks passed, then months. The first reply was the polite kind that says little. No photographs on file, no formal citation, perhaps a unit diary kept locally. The big archive at the National Personnel Records Center had gaps from a fire years earlier. Bridges, they implied, were temporary by design. They did not always leave a paper trail. Peterson read the letter at his kitchen table, coffee going cold beside a neatly folded newspaper. Outside, early autumn had already dulled the maple in his yard. He wrote again, enclosing a copy of a page from his worn notebook, stained, almost illegible, the pencil scuffed by time. Across the top, August 7, 1944, Vire River, 40 feet lost at 0217, rebuilt, first tank 0758. He underlined the hour twice, as if time itself were the only proof left. In Washington, an archivist followed his hunch into the stacks where misfiled reports sleep. He found a yellowed carbon in a folder marked simply Engineer OPS, France. The paper smelled of dust and machine oil. On the last line, in ink that had feathered with age, a signature, D. Pergrin, Major, 291 of Arbin. The report was short, almost clinical. Bridge constructed under fire in 14 hours. Span 280 feet. First armored vehicles crossed 0758. Estimated time saved, 48 hours. No photographs. No map. Just the skeleton of a miracle. Peterson received a copy by mail. He sat very still as he read it. The words were a river reduced to numbers, but the numbers were enough. He mailed a note to his old platoon sergeant, then to the address he had for Sergeant William Carney, unsure if it would find him. It did. The reunion happened the next summer in a VFW hall that smelled of dust, beer, and floor wax. A crooked banner read 291st ENGRS, Welcome Home. They came in slowly, wives guiding elbows, sons carrying boxes. They laughed at names they had not said in decades and flinched at noises no one else heard. Peterson brought his notebook. Carney brought something wrapped in a handkerchief. When the coffee had cooled and the stories had warmed, Carney laid the bundle on the table and opened it. Inside was a bent, blackened bolt, threads chewed, head split by a hammer blow. He had carried it out of France in his pocket, then in a cigar tin, then in the back of a dresser drawer through 3 moves and a mortgage. He did not say why. No one asked. A local reporter came by with a camera, the old kind that coughed light. He asked them what they remembered most. The fear? The shells? Carney shook his head. The sound, he said. Steel singing when it wanted to break. Peterson nodded. And the quiet after the first tank. They read aloud the line from Major, later Colonel, David Pergrin's book, First Across the Rhine, 1955, a sentence that had felt true even when nobody could prove their bridge existed. A bridge is more than steel. It's a promise that someone will make it to the other side. The hall fell into the gentle hush of men agreeing without needing to say the word. Letters followed. Someone found a faded stars and stripes clipping that mentioned engineer work under fire near St. Lo. Someone else produced a farm ledger from Normandy with a penciled note in the margin. Americans built a bridge on the Vire, August 44. Tanks like thunder. A French postcard arrived addressed simply to Monsieur Peterson, Pennsylvania. A photo of a calm river with new concrete banks. On the back, in careful script, Merci, Messrs. We remember. Peterson kept the postcard tucked into his notebook. On some mornings he would take both to the porch and lay them in the sun, as if light itself could fix the parts time had worn thin. Not all gaps closed. The National Archive never found a photograph of their bridge. The Corps' year-by-year summary recorded the unit's better-known triumphs and left St. Lo as a line half-buried in a paragraph. Most of the world read right past it. That felt right, in a way. The bridge had been built to be crossed, not admired. In the fall of 1981, the men met once more. Fewer now, voices softer. They raised paper cups to absent friends. Peterson read the 1944 report again, voice steady on the numbers. Carney slid the bent bolt into a new display box and printed a label for the VFW wall. Via Riverbolt, August 7th 44. We held, or we drowned. The quotation marks were his own. The truth inside them belonged to all of them. On his last night with the men, Peterson slept poorly in the motel by the highway. The room smelled faintly of old smoke and cleaner. Sometime past midnight, he woke to the imagined creak of timber under steel and lay there until the sound resolved itself into the air conditioner's sigh. He wrote a line on hotel stationery before sleep returned. We didn't fight for glory. We fought gravity. Years later, after funerals and folded flags, the bolt still hangs in the VFW hall. Beneath it, a laminated copy of Pergrin's sentence has browned at the edges. People pass it on fish fry nights, not always reading, sometimes pausing, often nodding without knowing why. Out in Normandy, the Vire runs between shaped banks. Children throw stones where men once threw ropes. The river swallows both with the same small sound. History tends to remember what explodes and forget what holds. The rifles and tanks got their headlines. The bridge got a number, a span, an hour stamped in a report. Yet the math remained stubborn. 14 hours, 280 feet, 48 hours saved, and a corridor that opened like a door no one could later close. On quiet mornings, when the veteran hall is empty and the neon beer signs are dark, you can stand under the bolt and hear, if you let yourself, a thin echo, hammer on pin, rope straining, a young sergeant saying we hold or we drown, and a river deciding not to win that day. They did not win the war with rifles or tanks. They won it with bolts, with rope, with hands that refused to let the impossible stay impossible, and a promise kept before sunrise, over Blackwater, that carried an army to the other side.